Good afternoon, this is Daniel here with Cops and Cons TV. I want to welcome everyone into our live show. We're going to go ahead and break down some of the most interesting and important cases and issues in policing from the last week or so. So let's see where everyone is joining us from. Happy Cinco de Mayo as well. It looks like we've got Sergeant George in from California. We have someone watching, Georgiana's watching from Florida, and Southern California as well, North Carolina. It's good to see everybody in. Again, if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you share it with your friends. Again, my name is Daniel. You can go ahead and follow me over at Police Law News on YouTube and just about everywhere else. So we got someone from Missouri, Joplin, Missouri, in here as well. And great. So like we do every week, as I'm going through some of these cases, and some of these are pretty controversial cases. As we're going through it, if you have any different ideas or opinions, or if you agree with what I say, almost more importantly, if you don't agree with what I say, put it in the chat, because one of our favorite things to do is really go back and forth with the audience and share information and really try to have a conversation about these really interesting and important police cases. So Steve says, I was talking to Steve Ladner earlier today. Do you think people should trust the justice system if a DA refuses to prosecute cops after a grand jury indictment? I'll get to that here in a few minutes. Let's see, Armando Chavez, New York City, so addicted to your videos, they make me laugh. Okay, great. So the first case that we're going to talk about, and I'm pretty sure everyone knows where we're going with this first case because it's been in the news the last couple of days. This happened on May 1st of this year in New York City on the subway. An individual died in the New York subway. His name was Jordan Neely. So let's talk a little bit about Jordan Neely. And just before we get into the facts of this case, the Manhattan prosecutors are looking at criminal charges, but no one has been charged as of yet. So Jordan Neely is an individual, and they've like to been saying that he's a Michael Jackson impersonator because sometimes, often he goes on the New York City subway and he impersonates and he pretends to be Michael Jackson. Well, listen, if all he was doing was dancing and pretending to be Michael Jackson, he would still be alive. Because that's not what he was doing on May 1st of this year on the New York City subway. What Jordan Neely did is he took off his shirt, he threw it on the ground, he started screaming and yelling on the subway, and what he was yelling was things such as that he was fed up and hungry, that he was tired of having nothing. He said he doesn't care, he doesn't mind if he goes back to prison, he doesn't mind if he gets a life sentence, and he said that he will attack and threaten anyone on the subway. Well, obviously there were a lot of normal, regular people on the New York City subway who are just trying to live their lives, who, don't really feel like they should be terrorized by a random violent maniac on the New York subway system. So what happened was while he was screaming and yelling and threatening people and pacing back and forth, a lot of people moved away from him, like women and older people and some men, because they felt threatened by him. So what happened was that there was a 24-year-old individual who was in the Marine Corps, and he went behind after Jordan Neely was, randomly just threatening people, saying he was going to beat everybody up and that he didn't care if he went back to jail. The Marine went behind him, got him in a chokehold, and dragged him to the ground. Once on the ground, he did have him in a chokehold or a submission hold. Two other individuals, two other adults, there was a white male and a black male, also were helping out. So we don't know the names of any of these individuals, but this was captured on cell phone video from an amateur journalist who happened to be on that subway car. The black individual who was helping out was grabbing Jordan's and controlling his arms, and there was another individual, a white guy, who was also trying to hold him down. He was in a chokehold for 2 minutes and 55 seconds. After that, tragically, Jordan stopped breathing, he stopped moving, and he did die. While this was going on, some of the passengers did call for police assistance. So they were trying to get police officers there. So this has caused an uproar in New York City. Black Lives Matter has been protesting. They are calling this the new George Floyd case. AOC went on the the Twitter and on TV and did some interviews over the last couple days, and she said that unequivocally that this is murder. She said that Jordan Neely was lynched. Now, when you say that someone is lynched, you are essentially saying that not only were they murdered, but they were murdered just because of their skin color. Now, we have no information on who the Marine is. We have no information on who the two other individuals are who also tried to hold Jordan Neely down. But what we do know is that there is no information or evidence that this had anything to do with race. It seems like this had everything to do with behavior because, again, had he just been impersonating Michael Jackson, no one would have had to intervene to stop individuals, to stop him from potentially being violent. Now, what's the protesters and Black Lives Matter, they want the Marine charged. They want him charged with murder, and so far his name hasn't gotten out, but that can't last for very long. So at some point, he's going to be a target, and his name and his information is going to get out there. The mayor of New York City, former police commander Eric Adams, he did do a news interview yesterday where he basically said, he essentially said that he wanted the investigation to play out. And that's honestly, that's the right thing for any politician to say. So since there is an ongoing investigation, saying that you think this is 100% justified or saying that this is 100% murder, this is a lynching, both of those are wrong because it is important for the investigation to play out. Now, what it seems like is there is no indication that the Marine and the two other individuals who were trying to hold down Mr. Neely, there's no indication that they were trying to kill him. So what this seems like, again, there is an ongoing investigation, but it seems like that this was an accidental death. It seems like that the Marine and the two other individuals were trying to control and subdue Jordan Neely because he was being violent. He was being not violent, but he was threatening people. And before it got to violence, this is what these citizens did on the subway car to try to make everyone safe. Now, this does touch on a couple different issues. So in 2020, the New York City Police Department was defunded by $1 billion. Now, you think, well, how is that related? How does that matter? Here's how this matters. So let's go from 2020 through now. There have been before Jordan Neely, from 2020 through the earlier this month, there were 27 people who have been killed on the New York City subway. So none of those other people get protests and rioters and all that kind of stuff. Just keep that in mind. But there have been 27 people who've died on the subway since 2020. Before that, from 2004 to 2019, so a 15-year period before Black Lives Matter got involved, before the protests, before George Floyd, before the defunding of the New York City Police Department, during that 15-year period, 2004 to 2019, 28 people died on the New York City subway systems. So what I'm saying is we have, since 2020, since the police were defunded, we have as many murders, homicides on the New York subway in 2.5 years as they had in the prior 15 years. So we can't say it's all because of defunding the police department, but I think reasonable people can say, well, that didn't help. Multiple times during the cell phone video that was captured, the people and the other witnesses, they were saying things like, we called the police, where the police, why aren't they here? That's a reasonable question, because when you have a city where police officers not only are defunded and there's not that many of them, but also when we create an environment where police are afraid to be proactive, they're afraid to do their jobs. When you have things like that, it creates a situation where normal random citizens who, again, are just trying to go about their daily lives feel it necessary that they have to intervene to keep everybody else safe. One of the things I always talk about when it comes to, and just so you know, Marines are trained when it comes to ground control and submission. So it's likely this Marine did have some training in this. However, the intent of this does not seem to be to kill Mr. Neely. That doesn't seem like that was the intent was. So I think we will get to that. What I would like to say, so Corey says, sounds like you made your mind up of what actually happened. Well, no, Corey Thomas, I've said multiple times, it doesn't seem like there was an intent to kill Mr. Neely. If you have evidence that's different, absolutely. As I've said a couple times, well, this is an ongoing investigation, meaning we're going to find out more of exactly what happened. We can only go by what was happening on the actual video. Now, let's talk a little bit more about Mr. Neely. Now, this is relevant when it comes to like a global sense of how does the city How does the police department? So if we're looking at this globally, like New York City is like a laboratory of some sorts, this information is relevant. Certainly the Marine, the individuals who helped the Marine, and the other passengers, of course, they wouldn't have had this information. But on a global sense, let's talk a little bit about Mr. Neely. So from 2003 until recently, he's been arrested 42 times. Multiple times he's been arrested for assault. One of those assaults was actually against a 67-year-old woman. On the day that he was killed, he actually had an active warrant for assault. Why I'm saying this, why I'm mentioning this, is someone is arrested. Most people never get arrested once in their entire life. It is very rare that anybody is arrested twice. He's been arrested 42 times since 2003. Don't you think there's a problem? Here's my question. Obviously, he's mentally ill. Information has come out that he's suffering from schizophrenia. We should be compassionate. I'm not saying we shouldn't be compassionate, but my question is, allowing him to be arrested and then let out, arrested and then let out onto the streets, how is that compassionate to Mr. Neely, who obviously needs help? That's obvious, right? This isn't normal. He obviously needs help. So this isn't compassionate for Mr. Neely to allow him to live like this. It also isn't compassionate for the regular, normal, decent people of New York City who are just trying to go about their day, who honestly do not deserve to be victimized and terrorized by violent maniacs. This isn't compassionate. Even Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, he's one of the very first Democrats in recent years to say what I'm about to say, that when it comes to involuntary incapacitation or involuntary mental health treatment, that those standards to do that he wants them to be lowered. That Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, has specifically said that mentally ill people who are committing crimes and who are violent and threatening people, that it isn't compassionate not only for the people, the citizens, but also for them, and that we have to do something. So Eric Adams has actually been trying to work with the state legislature to lower the requirements so that police officers and mental health workers in combination can get these people help, because I think we're all on the same page here, is that someone like Mr. Neely, yes, we should have compassion because he's suffering from mental illness, but allowing him to be out in the public, to threaten people, again, if he's arrested, we all know that when you're arrested for something, it's very rare that you're arrested. So if you're arrested for something 40 times, how many times have you actually committed crimes when you weren't arrested? Especially when the police department has been defunded and there aren't as many police officers as they should. So it's not unreasonable to think that he's been arrested 40-something times. How many times has he been contacted by cops and not arrested and let go or given a ticket? How many other times has he done something like this, threatened people, battered people, and he just hasn't been caught? He wasn't identified. So again, there is a lot to this. Obviously, the Marine didn't know this information. So I'm not saying, so I know people are going to be people are going to be purposely confused. I call that dishonest criticism. They're going to say, oh, it seems like you're saying because he had a bad history, because he had this violent history, that he deserved to be killed. No, absolutely not. If anything, what I'm saying is I want to live in a society where Jordan Neely gets the help that he so desperately needs and he doesn't get killed. But this is a situation where you put him on the subway, he's arrested over and over and over again. This is a situation where at some point, regular citizens aren't going to take being terrorized by him. There's also been reports that there's been different times where he's been allegedly tried to push people onto the subway tracks. This is someone who should not have been out in the general public without medication. Let's see if we have some comments on this. Sergeant George says, even if the death of Jordan Neely was accidental, moments like this is a very good reminder that some New Yorkers just have no calm. Absolutely, yes. Yes, and Sergeant George, I'm curious what you think. What do you think they should have done? So I think we have a couple different questions here, and I hope we're all on the same page, because we can definitely debate and discuss opinions, but facts, we should try to come together on the facts. So I hope everybody's with me that the Marine and the two individuals with him weren't trying to kill Jordan Neely. So maybe, and again, it's still an ongoing investigation, but I think that's pretty obvious that they were trying to subdue him. They called the police department. The Marine didn't run away and hide in the woods after this was done. It seemed like they were trying to subdue him, and this wasn't random. This wasn't like Jordan Neely was just standing there sitting around and he was randomly attacked by a Marine. No, he was acting in a violent, threatening manner, and it seems like the Marine went in and tried to stop that from happening. If anything, it seemed like the Marine was trying to prevent violence. Don't think there's any indication that there was an intent to try to kill Mr. Neely. Now, the New York City prosecutor is looking at charges. Now, we'll see. Now, you remember the bodega worker who killed the individual, which was initially charged, and then we covered that on the show. The bodega worker in New York City about 6 months ago was charged. Everybody was outraged. So I don't think this is as clear of self-defense because, again, I don't think there is any legal justification to kill Mr. Neely. I think there absolutely 100% is legal justification to hold him down, to stop him, to subdue him, to put him in a chokehold, to try to knock him out, to anything like that to stop the violence. Like, I hope we can all get on the same page and say, yes, that was probably reasonable, but no, death was not appropriate. So it seems like the death was accidental. So let's go down that rabbit hole. So what would likely charges be? Well, I know that the medical examiner called this a homicide, and a lot of people think that, well, it's a homicide, that it must be something criminal. No, that's not the case when it comes to that. What a homicide means from a medical examiner is that this wasn't an accident, it wasn't natural causes, or anything like that. Essentially, when one human, whether it's just, so medical examiners don't get into intent or law or anything like that. Medical examiners basically say, this is one human being who killed another one. It's under the broad category of homicide. Okay, so that's what we have. We have a broad category of homicide. Now, under homicide, we have two different tracks. We have murder and we have manslaughter. So if you intend to kill someone, if you say, I'm gonna walk across the street, I'm gonna hit you in the head with a hammer, and I'm gonna kill you. And then we find notes saying that you were gonna do this, you were telling people. So there's intent to kill, that's murder. That's obviously the most serious. Now, if you kill someone and you didn't mean to kill them, so there's no intent to kill, then you go down the rabbit hole of manslaughter. Under manslaughter, you have manslaughter and involuntary manslaughter. So voluntary and involuntary manslaughter. So this seems like if charges were going to be filed, this would be under the guise of voluntary manslaughter. What voluntary manslaughter is, in a very broad way, is essentially you were trying to hurt someone. So it's essentially like you were trying to commit some type of harm, whether the harm was justified or not. It's like if you're in a bar fight, okay? If you're in a bar fight and you punch someone, and they fall back and they hit their head and they die, well, that would be manslaughter or voluntary manslaughter because you were trying to do something. It's not like this was a complete accident. You were trying to cause some harm, but you weren't trying to kill them. So if criminal charges are filed, I would say manslaughter, voluntary manslaughter, something around there is likely what the charges would be. Trying to charge him with murder, now sometimes prosecutors do this. They charge high, hoping for a plea deal in the middle. So if he's charged with murder, just so you know, they're basically saying that the Marine had the intent to kill. That doesn't seem like the case, but again, some prosecutors do overcharge. All right, let's see if we have some comments here. Denny says, I was told if I keep videoing my local police station, I'd end up going missing, so I stopped. Okay, I'm not really sure. Let's see. Have any Officer Blue Gun, the argument for holding him for so long that he was fighting while being restrained without police showing up in 15 minutes. They did not have access to handcuffs or other means of restraint. Are we going to be surprised what the talks come back with? No, Officer Blue Gun, really good question and comment. No, I think what's going to come back is that either, and sometimes, and Officer Blue Gun, correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference between someone who's in the throes of schizophrenia, mental illness, and drugs. So, or if someone is just completely high on drugs, sometimes, especially if the video is only a few minutes, if you're with someone for an hour, you can probably suss it out, But, just watching a few minute video, it's difficult to tell. What's likely is a lot of times these individuals, people who are suffering from schizophrenia or other mental health and they're unmedicated, a lot of the times it's very common for them to self-medicate with illegal drugs. So it wouldn't be surprising to me is if we have a combination here that he was high on some type of substance and also in the throes of a mental health in the throes of a mental health episode. All right, any comments here? Let's see. Sergeant George says, yes, there's also involuntary manslaughter. Yes, there's also involuntary manslaughter. I don't think that would be appropriate here. It's a lesser form of manslaughter. So if you weren't trying to do any harm, If you weren't trying to do any harm at all, you weren't trying to make physical contact, could that be involuntary manslaughter? Yes. So that would be involuntary manslaughter. A lot of times drunk drivers are charged with involuntary manslaughter because there's no specific intent against a specific person. Here, the Marine seems like, we don't know for sure, seems like the Marine had the intent, okay, I'm going to take this guy, I'm going to subdue him, I'm going to choke him out. That's the intent. So there is some intent to do something physical, but certainly no intent to murder him. That's what it seems like. And I'm not saying that charges should be filed, but if there are charges filed, I would expect it to be somewhere in the voluntary manslaughter. Let's see, Steve says, I remember when medical examiners was ruling taser deaths underlying health conditions until police tased the coroner. Okay, I'm not sure what that case is. It's My Life says it's not falsifying government documents for overcharging. It's My Life, that is such a good comment. So typically, it wouldn't be falsifying government documents. So essentially, the prosecutors have to get past probable cause, right? So they have to get past, would a judge say, yes, based on this, there is probable cause. So could the prosecutors make an argument for murder that there was some intent, something inside the Marine's mind where he was trying to kill? Now, it's impossible. No one's a psychic, so it's impossible to really know without outside evidence. But, could I see them charging murder and then saying, yeah, we can show based on this, that he's a Marine, he should have known, he knew the technique, he did the technique wrong, that was on purpose. Could they go down that rabbit hole to charge murder? Yes. Do I think they would get a conviction on murder? No. But a lot of times prosecutors, they think that they'll charge it a little bit higher, hoping for a plea deal somewhere in the middle. That wouldn't, if they file charges, it wouldn't surprise me. But my legal opinion is that, the appropriate charges, if there are going to be charges filed, would be somewhere in the manslaughter range. Someone said it is blatant murder. If you say it's blatant murder, that means that something inside the Marine's mind where he had intent to kill, and you don't know that because you don't have psychic powers that I don't. Let's see, Officer. Georgiana Duckett says there were other options. Okay, yeah, let's talk about that, Georgiana. What were the other options? Should the Marine have punched him in the face? Should the Marine have roundhouse kicked him, taken him down to the ground and doing a technique that he thought was going to subdue him with the help of two other people, remember? I don't know. But the thing is, it's easy to say, if you're not the one in the subway car being terrorized by a violent maniac, it's very easy to say. On to Star says, Marine should have minded his own business. That's a fair point. The Marine should have minded his own business until when? What if on the stars, Jordan Neely, like he had done 40-something other times at least, started hitting and battering people? Do you let 2, 3, or 4 elderly women get attacked before you step in? So, the Marine made a decision. Again, it's not like Jordan Neely was just sitting there minding his own business. No, he was actively threatening people, saying he didn't mind going back to jail, threatening people when this occurred. So if you don't do that, this kind of stuff won't happen. All right, so let's go into the next case. So the next case that I want to talk about, I was actually talking to Officer Blue Gun about this before the show today. So this is a really interesting case. It's out of Chicago. It happened on April 15th of this past year. It was an officer-involved shooting, and the reason that we're talking about it now is because the body cam footage just came out. This is a shooting, an officer-involved shooting. The individual who was shot by Chicago police was a 24-year-old named Reginald Clay. Now, before the body cam footage came out, Reginald Clay Sr., so his father, the family filed a lawsuit against the police officers, and I quote, in the news, the family said that the officer-involved shooting was unprovoked and unwarranted. Remember that. So because the thing is, once there's an officer-involved shooting, before the body camera footage come out, it's not like the police officer or the representatives for the police officer or the police department can come out and say what happened, right? They don't have to do that. Imagine being a police officer, you're involved in a completely lawful, justified, reasonable shooting, and you have the family, and maybe you were threatened with a gun, and you have the family out there just spewing lies. It has to be so unbelievably irritating knowing you can't go and fight back. This is how police officers and police departments fight back with the truth, by putting body camera footage out. So remember that Reginald Clay Sr. said that this officer-involved shooting involving his son was unprovoked and unwarranted. Here's what the body cam footage shows. The body cam footage shows that police officers roll up in a high crime area a high drug area, and they see Reginald Clay, who is in the area leaning into a car. Experienced police officers in this case are going to testify that it seemed like there was some type of a drug activity going on. Police officers got out, approached, and Mr. Clay ran from police officers, and police officers gave chase. I'm going to get into whether or not that was legal here in a second, but police officers gave chase, and they're kind of running through gangways and alleyways in Chicago as Mr. Clay was running from police officers, and this is all on body camera footage. As he was running from police officers, he turns around, and from his waistband, he pulls out a firearm. And when he pulls out the firearm, he faces towards the police officer, pulls out a firearm, and then changes direction, starts going towards the police officer. It's at that point the police officer pulls out his firearm and shoots Mr. Clay. So after that body camera footage came out, the family, so Mr. Clay Sr. and the family, no longer said, use the words unprovoked and unwarranted, because it obviously was, right? I mean, if someone pulls out a gun and starts to point the gun at you, no reasonable person can say that that's an unreasonable shooting. So they pretty much changed the narrative. And instead of criticizing the police officer and the police department about the actual shooting, they changed it to, oh, well, the police officer never should have been chasing him in the first place. Okay, that's great. But again, I think we should all talk about the truth, and you're only making that argument because your son had a gun and was pointing it and pulled it on a police officer, so the shooting is obviously justified. Now they're complaining about the reason for the stop, so that is a good question. This is what me and Officer Blue Gun were talking about before the show today. Can police officers chase you because you run? That is such a good question. So there's actually a case out there. It's a Supreme Court case, but it's from Illinois. It's called Illinois versus Wardlow. And here's what Wardlow said. That flight alone is not a reason for that a police officer can't chase. So in order for, let's start a little bit higher. Police officers have to have reasonable suspicion in order to detain someone, okay? Reasonable suspicion. What that is specific facts that can be articulated by the police officer that a crime has been, is being, or will be committed. Reasonable suspicion, okay, of a crime being committed. That's what police officers have, the lowest level in order to detain someone. And that really isn't a high bar, okay? That's not a high bar. So is just police officers seeing someone running, is that reasonable suspicion? So the court said no, that isn't. So as I think a lot of people know, because I broke my nose a few months ago doing it, but I'm a trail runner. So I typically run trails. I run about 20 miles a week. And where I run, it's up in the foothills in the mountains, and there's really no one around. So there really aren't a whole lot of police officers I see. But let's say I was running on the street for some reason. I got my headphones in, and a police officer sees me running. Can they just stop me for no reason? No, of course not. So that's what the Supreme Court said. Running alone, flight alone is not reasonable suspicion. But what the court also said in Wardlow is that running or flight upon sight of a police officer, so it's not like someone's running, police officer rolls up and sees them. No, it's someone who's standing still or just kind of hanging out. They see the police officer and then they flight. The court called that unprovoked flight in combination with it being a high crime area, a high drug area. That combination of factors actually does give police officers reasonable suspicion to stop someone. So in this case, it does seem like, and I'm not saying I agree with this case, to me that it almost gives police a little bit too much leeway, I think, a lot. So I'm not even sure I 100% agree with the Supreme Court on this, but it's important for me to say this is what the law says, is that if it's a high crime area, high drug area, and someone who wasn't previously fleeing upon sight of a police officer flees, Illinois versus Wardlow says that is reasonable suspicion for police officers to stop someone and at least detain them under reasonable suspicion of a crime has been committed. So it does seem like this case does meet that Wardlow standard. So I think that's going to be the case, that legally, on a legal level, this probably is a legal reason to stop Mr. Clay. However, Chicago Police Department, and we have covered this on the show before, does have a foot chase policy. It's basically an internal policy that says when police officers can engage in foot chases. So if I remember correctly, most of the time police officers can chase for misdemeanors, but they have to have pretty concrete misdemeanors, right? Domestic violence, drunk driving, reckless driving. They can still chase for pretty much all felonies, but when it comes to foot chases, without a specific crime, unless you saw the hand-to-hand drug transaction, or someone has a warrant, which at least now isn't being alleged, right? Basically, like basic elements for Wardlow, the high crime area, unprovoked flight. So it seems like that's at least from what we know right now, it seems like that was the reason for going after Mr. Clay. So it seems like this is a situation where this could be legal under the law. However, police departments have the ability and often do make policies that police officers have to follow that are more restrictive than case law. So I think this is likely a case where this is probably a violation of the foot chase policy, but it is likely a lawful foot chase, a lawful detention, and then because a gun was pulled on him, obviously a lawful officer-involved shooting. So then we have to ask, well, what's going to happen to the officer? Well, if it's a lawful officer-involved shooting, there shouldn't be any charges for the police officer, of course not. And, it likely, the actual time that the trigger was pulled, that guy had a gun, was pulling it on the officer. So that should be within policy, right? So, what is the punishment for police officers who violate the foot chase policy? Maybe a day off. So that's what I would expect for the police officer. Maybe a day or two off, whatever that is. If the officer has violated the foot chase policy 4 times in the past, that could be accelerated to a little bit more. Maybe the first time you violate the foot chase policy, it's only a written reprimand. Who knows? I don't know the ins and outs of the Chicago Police Department's disciplinary system, but that's likely what would happen. Whatever the punishment is for violating the foot chase policy, that's the maximum that I would expect, because I do think that this was actually legal under the law. Let's see if we have any comments on this case in Chicago. Officer Blue Gun says, okay, so you're going back and forth with someone. Steve says, if we have a Second Amendment, how can police shoot someone if they may have a gun? Oh, Steve, that's such a good question. So, that's not the facts of this case, Steve. So it's not like Mr. Clay was standing there, he had a gun, holstered, wasn't holding it in his hand, that he was just standing there, police officers roll up and shoot a guy because there's a gun in his pocket. Not the case. Not the case what happened here, Steve. So facts are important, Steve Ladner. So in this case, he was running from a police officer. He turned around, pulled a gun out of his waistband, and started moving the gun in the direction of the police officer. That's not covered under the Second Amendment, okay? That is, it would be reasonable for a police officer to think that this person who's running from them in that moment was going to use the gun against the police officer. This is objectively reasonable all day. Now again, so like I said, so we have a set of facts that happen in this case. Steve Ladner gave an example of a different case that literally doesn't exist in reality. But, if someone is just standing there with a gun, and let's say the gun is holstered, just standing there randomly, and the person is talking to their wife or kids or friend, police officers obviously cannot walk up and just start shooting at people because they have a gun on them somewhere. So under that fact pattern, police officers cannot do that, Steve, but that is not what happened in the case that we're talking about now. Let's see. Wise says cops also mute audio to conceal collusion. No, they absolutely don't. Wise Metric says cops mute audio as they choose. That's not correct, Wise Metric. So what I'm going to say about that is do a little bit of research on body cameras, and I'm gonna explain how body cameras work. So let's talk about Axon cameras made by the Taser company, and that's made by the Taser company. And we can go, I'll explain kind of how these work. But just in general, Illinois state law does say that police officers can mute audio when they're talking to each other about tactics or about an investigation and stuff like that. So just quickly for an example, let's say police officers are about to do a raid on a house and they want to talk about tactics. Hey, you go in the back, I'll go in the front, and we'll do this. Talking about tactics, they are allowed to mute that. And then when they actually make contact with people, like citizen contact, they have to record. But here's how the body cameras work. Typically, here's how they're set up. So body cameras are essentially, they're kind of like in a standby mode. When a police officer presses the button and turns it on, what it does is it captures video from 30 seconds prior to when you hit the button. But you get audio immediately. Now, the reason why that's good is you can imagine it's a situation where a police officer is standing there. When a police officer is in their car or anything like that, and someone runs up to them all crazy, and they hit the button because they didn't have their camera on before because they're not contacting anyone, right? So when things happen quick, it's very reasonable that when you hit the button that you get an extra 30 seconds of video. Now, the way the cameras are set up, it doesn't catch audio. That's not the fault of the police officers. That's literally the hardware, the software of how these cameras work. So a lot of times when it shows that there's 30 seconds of video without audio, that's nothing the police officer did. It's just from the time the police officer hit the button, you get video from 30 seconds back and the video and audio from the time you hit the button. So that is not police officers muting or doing anything funny. That's just literally how the taser acts on cameras work. Yeah, so we also, there used to be days where tasers had to be plugged into body cameras and stuff like that. But so again, so if you're saying that police officers shouldn't be able to mute when they're having conversations about tactics and investigations, well, that's a different conversation. Point to a case, and yeah, we can go ahead and discuss that specific one. But I think you have a misunderstanding of exactly how police body cameras work. So I'm happy to educate. That's why I'm here. Officer Bluegun says the Civilian Office of Police Accountability investigated and found no wrongdoing. Absolutely. Yeah, so the police department found no wrongdoing. Let's say, I think therefore I am. You can't say some cops haven't muted body cams to commit conspiracy. No, I'm not. I think before I am. I'm not saying it's never happened. And if a police officer violates policy or law, they should absolutely be punished for it. But what I'm saying is that typically police officers can mute if they are going to talk about tactics or an investigation. That's normally how body camera policies work, how state law works in most places when it comes to body cameras. But citizen contact, that doesn't count. You have to record citizen contact. So again, if you have an issue with that, police officers be able to when they talk about tactics, not being able to mute, again, that's a different conversation. Obviously, if police officers are doing conspiracy to commit crimes, well, obviously that's criminal, and I want those officers prosecuted just as much as you do. Sergeant George says, let's see, moments like this is exactly why qualified immunity exists. Absolutely, 100%. The real Cynthia says, we have plenty of evidence of footage muted to protect cops from collusion. The real Cynthia, again, so general criticism, I don't think is all that helpful. So name one case. Put one case in the chat, and what I will do is I will look into it, and I will get back to you and cover it next week. How about that? Does that sound nice? So yeah, so put in a case. And when you just say general things, cops are racist, cops are bad, cops are tyrants, okay, that's not very helpful. That makes you seem uneducated. Say, here's a case, here's what the police did, and the police weren't punished for it because of some reason. Tell me about that case. If that's what happened, Cynthia, I'm probably going to agree with you because I do not want cops to violate policy or violate law. I will be standing with you saying those cops should face consequences for those actions if that's what happened. But when you just have general criticism, again, not very helpful. Put in a specific case to the chat. I promise I will look into it. All right, so that's that case. There's a couple of other cases that are older cases, but like really big and important cases that really got a lot of news attention over the last couple of years, and they kind of wrapped up in this last week. So I'm going to go over them a little bit quickly because, when we talk about cases on the show and in the media, and when a case finally comes to conclusion, I think it's important to wrap it up and just kind of put a bow on it just to see where everybody's at with it. So the case that I'm going to talk about, it's Officer Tao, and he was one of the officers in the George Floyd case. So he was actually just convicted of state-level charges of aiding and abetting second-degree murder. So if you remember the George Floyd case, like everybody does, right? So what Officer Tao did, he was the Asian officer who actually had no contact with George Floyd. He had no physical contact with George Floyd. What Officer Tao did is he was on crowd control. There was an angry crowd, and they were becoming angry, they were becoming aggressive, and they were advancing towards police officers. Now, here's the thing. It was reasonable for them to be angry. It was reasonable for them to be aggressive with police officers because Officer Chauvin was committing unnecessary and excessive force on George Floyd. We're going to talk about, we don't have to get into exactly, about, yes, George Floyd was high in fentanyl. We don't have to get into any of that. All I'm making in the statement is, and I hope everyone agrees, the force that Derek Chauvin was using was unnecessary and excessive. That's all I'm saying. So when individual bystanders see a police officer obviously using unnecessary and excessive force, it's reasonable for good, decent citizens to be upset with that, right? So I'm not saying that the citizens didn't have a reason to be upset. They did have a reason to be upset. But from Officer Tao's position, all Officer Tao knows, there are 3 police officers behind me. One guy has 19 years on, and he's a field training officer. So, and there's 2 kind of rookies that are with him as well. But Officer Tao, it would be, why would Officer Tao think, hey, this guy, Derek Chauvin, he's had a 19-year career. He's still around in the police department. He's a field training officer. No one would think that this guy who's close to retirement is going to commit one of the most heinous acts on video right behind him. No one reasonable would think that was going to happen. So the idea that Officer Tao was concentrating on the crowd and trying to keep them away was reasonable. I don't think that Officer Tao should have been charged. I think it was a political prosecution. Again, he never had contact with George Floyd. And again, there was no way for Officer Tao to know what was happening behind him, that George Floyd was actually going to die. There was no way for him to know that, but he was sentenced to 3.5 years. But the thing is, he was already sentenced to 3.5 years on the federal level because these officers in the George Floyd case, all 4 of them, they were charged with federal civil rights violations and state level crimes. So Officer Tao, he's already serving 3.5 years for the civil rights violations. This was the state level charges. So essentially, and the way this happened is it actually didn't go to trial. What happened was his attorneys essentially wrote up a brief, and the attorneys for the prosecution wrote up a brief, and they came to an agreement that, okay, if Officer Tao is found guilty, he will only be sentenced to 3.5 years that he was already doing. So essentially, he would serve it at the same time. So the time served would be concurrent with the federal charges he was already facing. So again, it didn't go to trial. That's why it wasn't in the news. It was just each side wrote a brief and the judge ruled. The judge found him guilty, but again, just served him to serve 3.5 years. But he's already doing 3.5 years for the federal civil rights violation. That is the last police officer to get sentenced for the state or federal charge in the George Floyd case. So from now, essentially all we have are appeals and jail time. That's really it. But because they're federal convictions, I wouldn't really expect any appeals to be successful unless it's the Derek Chauvin trial at the Supreme Court level. The Court of Appeals already said that they're not gonna do anything with the Derek Chauvin's case. So we'll see what happens at the Supreme Court level. But so that case is pretty much over. And what a lot of people ask is, isn't that double jeopardy? Like, how can the government charge you with on the federal level and also on the state level? How is that not double jeopardy? Well, here's how. So you have to look at it this way. You can only be charged with a crime in the jurisdiction that it happened. So if you commit a murder in Minnesota, only the Minnesota government, right? That county, that city, only the Minnesota government can charge you with that crime. Maybe you're from Wisconsin or the victim's from Louisiana. So Louisiana can't go ahead and charge you if it happened in Minnesota. Wisconsin can't charge you if it happened in Minnesota. So so when it comes to double jeopardy, only the jurisdiction where it happened can't charge you with the crime. So the way that this is looked at is, okay, so the jurisdiction was Minnesota. So we go ahead and charge him in Minnesota court. But the way it's seen is that federal courts are a different jurisdiction. Even though it's the same act, the same crime, in the same jurisdiction, they're allowed to charge you on the federal level as well. Now, I think that's kind of bullshit. And I'm not just saying that in this particular case. A lot of defense attorneys who are typically not fans of police officers have been complaining about this literally since I started studying criminal justice stuff, approximately 20 years ago when I was doing my undergrad, that defense attorneys were complaining about this. And here's normally where this comes into play. Normally it comes into play with like higher level financial crime. So someone will be charged with fraud on the state level and then some type of conspiracy. Computer's not my thing, right? So some type of federal conspiracy or embezzlement or something else on the federal level. So defense attorneys would complain, well, shit, like it's the same crime. Like why are you charging state crime and fed crime? So it's normally federal financial crimes. And again, defense attorneys, including Mark Garagos, have been complaining about this bullshit for years. I've always thought it was wrong and weird. Like if you want to charge someone on the federal level, charge them. If you want to charge someone on the state level, charge them. But if it's literally the same action, even though technically per the law it's not double jeopardy, it fucking feels like double jeopardy. So not only for police officers, but all defendants. And again, when it comes to this federal charges, police officers are not the majority of people who fall into this, where they're charged really twice. And it's mostly defense attorneys who, again, aren't fans of police officers who have been saying that this is wrong for at least 20 years. To me, it seems wrong. Curious what you guys think. Sergeant George says, who can blame the civilians for the outrage that came out of what Derek Chauvin did? Not me. Thank you, Sergeant George. You always have great comments. Yeah, I agree. again, I think that what the civilians were doing, seeing what Chauvin was doing, it should be upsetting. I get why they were upset. I have no beef with that at all. I think that what they were doing, how aggressive they were, I think it was reasonable under the circumstances because they had a very clear view of what Chauvin was doing. Officer Blue Gun says, I guess rationally and logically, while taking the facts and circumstances of what specifics into the count is warped. Sergeant George says, even Iowa and or Michigan can't charge you for what happened in Minnesota. Exactly. Let's see. Okay. Thank you, Dave London. You have a brilliant comment today. Let's see. Okay. So that's that case. The other case that wrapped up this week is the Kim Potter case. Now, we all remember the Kim Potter case. So this also happened in Minnesota in 2020. This is the case where Kim Potter did a traffic stop on Dante Wright. She did a traffic stop on Dante Wright for expired license plate. It was a legal traffic stop upon contact with Dante Wright. He was a 20-year-old, found that he had a warrant for weapons violation. She tried to make a legal arrest. Dante Wright decided that, hey, I'm just not going to go to jail today. So he fought with police officers. He tried to leave the scene. Kim Potter tried to tase him. She pulled out her, she yelled, taser, taser, taser. But in all the commotion, in the dynamic situation, she pulled out her handgun and fired it and shot him one time instead of utilizing her taser. It's called taser confusion. From 2000 to now, from about the time we started to use tasers, it happens about one time with United States police officers where an officer, usually in a dynamic, fast-moving use of force situation, pulls out their handgun instead of their taser and the individual ends up dying. Again, it happens about once a year. This happened in 2020, the exact wrong time for Kim Potter for this to happen. So, and the thing is, so some people have said that, Kim Potter purposely did that. Listen, she didn't purposely use her gun. The reason is Kim Potter had been a cop for like 26 years. 26 years with an unblemished record. Literally no problems for 26 years. She yelled taser, taser. She was visibly upset afterwards. So what you would have to say is Kim Potter is just about to retire. But instead of retiring after like a really good and decent and successful career, what she's going to do is she's going to murder a 20-year-old black person for no reason, risk 15 years in prison just because she felt like it. Like, that's absolutely insane. The thing is, even Dante Wright's family, the attorneys for the family, the prosecutor, and the judge. So all of those people know more about the situation than dishonest critics on the internet. They all agree this was not intentional. This was negligence, maybe even reckless, but it was a mistake. So just so you know, even people representing Dante Wright's family, no one's saying that this was intentional. So Kim Potter was sentenced to just under 2 years in prison. She just got out. And what I've been asked about a lot on my TikTok channel, Police Law News, that's where I do daily videos and stuff like that. But I've been asked a lot of times when I did a video on this, well, what do I think about the Kim Potter sentence? Good thing you asked. I'm going to tell you. So the Kim Potter sentence, so essentially she was charged with, some type of negligence, negligence resulting in death, which I think that's correct. I think she was negligent, and I think her negligence did cause or partly caused the death of Dante Wright. So I do think and understand, and I agree with her being arrested, prosecuted, and charged. How do I feel about the sentence, which was just around 2 years? Well, so essentially what she was looking at was a maximum of 15 years in prison. But the sentencing report, when you look at her background, the court does like a pre-sentencing report that's, pretty, it's more like a computer-generated thing where they type in a bunch of stuff and it spits out what they think a sentence should be. A lot of different, or what like an average sentence would be for this, depending upon the person's history and some of the facts, all that kind of stuff. So what the pre-sentence report recommended, and the judge doesn't have to follow this. The judge could have sentenced her to 15 years. But what the pre-sentence report sentence said was 7 years is what was recommended for Kim Potter. So let's start there. So we've got 7 years. Well, Dante Wright, because he was at least half responsible for his own death, and I'm being generous there. At least half responsible, probably more, but at least half responsible for his own death. So I'm going to take that 7 years, I'm going to cut it right in half. So I'm at about 3.5 years for Kim Potter. Then I have to think, okay, well, what else am I looking at when it comes to the sentence? Well, intent goes a long way with me. So intent is, what was someone trying to do? And you can criticize me, but I'm going to be just as honest as I can be. I put a lot of weight on intent when I do all of my breakdowns. The reason is what someone was trying to do to me is very important, because if someone we want people to have good intent. We want people to not have bad intent. So what was Kim Potter's intent? Well, she did a legal traffic stop. She was trying to make a legal arrest. If everything went perfectly for Kim Potter, she would have arrested Dante Wright without incident and went home and enjoyed her evening. So that was Kim Potter's intent. Now, what was Dante Wright's intent? Dante Wright's intent was to commit more crimes and flee from police and not go to jail. Well, that's bad intent. So because of that, I'm gonna call this an asshole tax, and I'm gonna take that 3.5 years, I'm gonna lop off another year. So I'm at about 2.5 years for Kim Potter. So I think 2.5 years would have been a fair and reasonable sentence for Kim Potter, with good time and stuff like that. 2 years, that's about right. So I think Kim Potter's sentence of 2 years, you know what? I think that was about right. And what I like about talking about this case is I'm gonna get shit from both sides. I'm gonna have some people say that, no, she should have done 15 years, she's a murderer. I'm gonna have other people yell at me and say she never should have been prosecuted. So, I think that I'm being reasonable and, kind of like alt-middle when I know I'm gonna get shit from both sides. And I've written several articles and done a lot of videos about the Kim Potter case. And I'm telling you, this is what happens. I get almost no one who agrees with me, and people tell me that she should have done 15 years. Other people say she shouldn't have been prosecuted. I think the way that I came to this 2 years, 2.5 years, I think that's about right for Kim Potter. All right, let's see if we have any comments on this. Steve says, Derek Chauvin is in jail because police have pissed off the population. Yeah, I think it was partly, yeah. Sergeant George says, in the heat of the moment, it becomes a challenge for police officers to tell the difference between a firearm and a taser. Yeah, taser confusion happens about once a year. Susan says, until police training is completely changed, nothing will ever change. They literally deny applicants with too high of an IQ, no joke. Susan, why did you say that? Because now you're gonna force me to talk about this. Susan, that's not correct. I've actually written an article about this, so I'm only gonna talk about it for about 30 seconds, but Susan, why don't you go follow me over on Substack over at Police Law Newsletter. About last October, I wrote a long form article basically debunking what you said because it's bullshit and it's not true. So I wrote a whole article about it. I cite the case, but what Susan is referring to is one time, 25 years ago, someone scored high on an IQ test and they weren't hired by the police department. Not because they had too high of an IQ, but what the police, this one small police department in like New Hampshire, I can't even find New Hampshire on a map, okay? This was like the 90s in New Hampshire. What they found, what the police department thought, like this few administrators, what they thought is that if someone had a high IQ, that they would get bored of the job because it's a small town. They would get bored of the job and they would not stay with the department for 20 years, which is what the police department was looking for. So they had some type of personality test that said this. And this case went to the Supreme Court, and basically the Supreme Court sided with the police department that, because he sued for an unlawful like not hiring or something. So what the Supreme Court said is, hey, not hiring someone because of an IQ, of not a high IQ, that's a bad idea. That's a really bad idea. But when it comes to discrimination, there is no discrimination class for people with high IQ. So basically, what the Supreme Court said is that having an IQ isn't a protected class. Now, what I mean by that is race, sex, age, gender, sexual orientation, family status, all of those things are protected classes. High IQ, like being a Chicago White Sox fan, or someone who wears a purple shirt, or someone who just got a haircut. Those are categories of people that's not a protected class. So again, the Supreme Court in that case said, yeah, it's a bad idea, but you're not in a position to where you can sue. So saying that police officer, so what I'm getting at here, Susan, this was one case from a state that I can't find on a map, because I've never been to the Northeast. One state that I can't find on a map 25 years ago is the only case of where this happened. Since then, there have been millions of police officers hired and people not hired by police departments since then. This has never happened since. Read the article, Susan. All right, so Free Talk says, when you give somebody without a college education a badge, this is the result. Well, Kim Potter had a college degree, so yeah, I don't know what to tell you there. Let's see, Officer Bluegun says, because college degrees make people intelligent and proficient. Yeah, so I haven't seen any research or anything that says people with college degrees don't have taser confusion. Steve says, I met a high IQ officer. He helped me in the oil fields because it was not okay. All right. Let's see. Any other comments on this? No other comments on that case, but sorry I get a little bit worked up about the IQ thing. It's because, and now we're not going to hear from Susan for the rest of our lives, but if you haven't followed me on Substack, please go ahead. I write articles about these issues and debunk this bullshit all the time. Okay, so the last case that I'm going to talk about is a case that happened in Cleveland, Texas, kind of on the border. This happened in Cleveland, Texas, a tragic case. Cleveland, Texas, earlier this week, there were 5 people who were killed. Here's what happened. So this is about 11 o'clock at night. There was a Honduran family. That's how they were described in the media. A Honduran family was trying to put down a newborn to sleep at 11 o'clock at night. Well, again, intent goes a long way with me. That seems like a reasonable thing for a family to do, to put down a newborn at 11 o'clock at night. But they have a neighbor, Francisco Oropesa, a 38-year-old man, and for whatever reason, he was outside firing his gun. At 11 o'clock at night, that made it difficult for the newborn to fall asleep. So the family did what any normal family might do. They walk over to the neighbor's house. They didn't call the police. They weren't Karens or anything like that. They walk over to the neighbor's house and they say, hey, we're trying to put a newborn down. It's 11 o'clock at night. Can you stop shooting your gun? That's, again, very reasonable. That's a good intent. That goes a long way with me. Well, he didn't like that. Francisco Oropesa decided that he's going to be an absolute piece of shit. And what he did is he took his rifle, he walked over to the neighbor's house, he went in and he started shooting. He killed 5 people, including an 8-year-old. Some of the people who were killed were literally protecting the infant who were in there. Of course, after the shooting, he was an absolute coward. He ran from the scene, and there was a huge manhunt. I got to give props to the law enforcement in Texas, local police, county police, state police, in coordination with the feds. They did a huge manhunt. They actually did get him into custody, I think within 24 hours. His wife, he was still in the area. He hadn't gotten far. There's a wooded area nearby. His wife, or his long-term partner, and also a friend, they have also been arrested in connection with this. So we don't know exactly what their charges are, but I think we can all assume it's like harboring him or something, or lying to police, lying to the feds, something like that. Now, what's important to note in this case, besides it being a tragedy, is that this was absolutely 100% preventable. The reason this was preventable is because Mr. Oropesa had been deported 4 different times from the United States. 4 different times he was deported and he came back. He never should have been in the country in the first place. Now, what the police, when he was apprehended, what they were saying is that he was trying to go back to Mexico. So he was trying to find a plan in order to flee the country to avoid these charges. Yeah, the only fucking time he wants to go back to Mexico is after he kills 5 people. So glad that he was apprehended, glad that he was arrested by police officers. Like I said, it was a great effort by not just local police officers, but state, county, and the feds to get this guy into custody. So he's a 38-year-old. He will be charged with the 5 murders. Completely unreasonable. I mean, what kind of person, because a neighbor asks them to stop shooting their gun, walks over to the neighbor's house, into the house, and kills 5 people, including an 8-year-old? That level of evil, I can't even begin to speak about it. That was a horrible tragedy that happened this week. And again, he never should have been in the country. He's been deported 4 times. So I know we can talk about immigration, stuff like that, but I think most people are on the same page, or we should all be on the same side of this, is that this kind of stuff shouldn't be able to happen. We should have a safe and secure border, and normal, regular families who are just trying to put an infant to sleep should not have to deal with this kind of stuff. So that's going to be, we'll take a couple more comments before we take off for the day. Let's see. Steve said, no, Steve already got that comment. Let's see. I think therefore I am. Where do we send stuff for you to review? Found several incidents of police turning off body-worn cameras for a questionable purpose. I would like to send it in an email if possible. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, cool. I think we will put our email in the chat. Yeah, put our email in the chat. Or, again, what you can always do is you could always just put videos in there. So what I do throughout the week, even after the show, is I do check comments throughout the week, and I answer questions, and I go back and forth with people and have nice conversations. So, so that's what we do. But we did just put our email in the chat. If you want to go ahead and email it, I'll take a look at it. And again, so here's my point, just so I'm clear, just because I want to be clear on this. I'm not saying that police officers are perfect. I'm not saying police officers don't do this. What I'm saying is that if police officers do it and it's a violation of policy, they should face whatever charges or internal charges for the policy violation. If they do and it's a conspiracy that's against the law, those police officers should be arrested and prosecuted. So that's my point on it. What I was saying is that I was explaining to whoever asked the question specifically about how body cameras work, and that typically what you don't see is a police officer who's in the middle of a fight with someone and specifically mute their camera or turn off their camera. That typically isn't something that happens. Again, could it happen? Yes, but that's not the normal thing. I watch body camera. We have a body camera channel, right? I watch body camera video all the time. That typically isn't what happened. But if it does and it's wrong, you know what's going to happen? I'm going to agree with you. Hey, this is wrong, and we're all going to denounce it together. All right, last comment is, Officer Bluegun, if someone could actually say something against police in a chat backed up by facts, logic, I'll be amazed. That's so funny. Truth says, no, they mute when they talk to partner in a car. Truth, yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. When they're talking about what's your body cam channel? Thank you for asking. Our body cam channel is Cops and Cons TV. So what we do is we put out body cam video, really just raw, interesting, just awesome body cam video from all around the country, and we upload, we IPRO those, and we upload those for you every single week. And then once a week I do a live show and we talk about really interesting really interesting issues in policing. Yeah, this is our channel. We do excellent fake cops, politicians being arrested, other fine human beings being arrested by police officers. The most interesting body cam video we can find, we put on this channel, and then I do this show once a week. So that's going to be it for this week. I really want to thank everyone for coming in, the participation. Again, I really enjoy it when people have different opinions other than me, because I think that's where we disagree. That's where the discussions have to happen, where we stop having conversations of things that we agree with or things that we disagree on. I think that's where communication and society break down. So I really want to appreciate everyone from coming in. Thank you so much. Have a safe weekend, and we will see you all very soon.